And this is the Saturday grab bag. Don't worry, you haven't lost track of time. It's Sunday. Unfortunately, events of Friday more or less forced me into making a non-grab bag video on Saturday. So we're going to be talking about Zelenskyy's suit. We're going to be talking about the farm inheritance tax. We're going to be talking about tinned fruit. We're going to be talking about the BBC disaster of the programme about Gaza. And then I'm going to tell you about a play about Tommy Cooper, Eric Morecambe and Bob Monkhouse. OK, I'm Granniopteryx. I'm on YouTube, Rumble, BitChute and Minds. So we start with the biggest laugh of the week, in which J.D. Vance tells Keir Starmer that there's restrictions on free speech in Britain, and Keir Starmer sits back and lies through his teeth, if they really are his teeth, of course, saying that, of course, we've had free speech a long time. He's a lawyer. Let me just go over how he dealt with this. Talk about two-tier Keir. Listen to Vance first.
Also with some of our European allies, but we also know that there have been infringements on free speech that actually affect not just the British. Of course, what the British do in their own country is up to them, but also affect American technology companies and by extension American citizens. So that is something that we'll talk about today at lunch.
We've had free speech for a very, very long time in the United Kingdom, and it will last for a very, very long time. You don't agree?
Right. Now, did you notice what he said? Now, this is the difference, for instance, between Starmer and Zelenskyy. Between somebody who has been taught how to do sneaky, hypocritical diplomacy and somebody who hasn't. Vance says, you're restricting free speech and it's causing trouble not only for you poor buggers in Britain, but it's also affecting our tech companies. Absolutely right, 100% reasonable. And what does Starmer do? He sits back, he throws his hands out and he said, we've had free speech for a very long time in England. Does he say England or Britain? Ah, that's interesting. Let's have a look.
Free speech for a very, very long time in the United Kingdom.
Oh, he calls it the United Kingdom, which is in itself interesting because it wasn't the United Kingdom for much of its very long time. In fact, I think actually, just a minute, let's try this. The Act of Union, 1800. So we haven't had free speech for a very long time. But notice he says we've had it for a very long time. He doesn't say we have it now. And he also says, and it'll go on for a long time. But that's not still saying that we actually have free speech. That's a real lawyer speak. Let's listen to it again.
Very, very long time in the United Kingdom, and it will last for a very, very long time. You don't agree with that?
Right. And Vance is right. I want to show you, he contradicted Vance, but he sat back and he just lied. He wasn't honest, and because he wasn't honest, he got away with it. I just want to point that out. I'm not arguing now Zelenskyy's case. As I said in the previous video I made, they were all acting quite badly, actually, in my opinion. OK, right, but let's get back to British free speech. Police quiz grandfather who called a neighbour Mrs. T. Now, I thought at first that he meant Mrs. Thatcher, but no, he's referring to a derogatory term used in England, and it sounds rather similar to the word twit, which is itself derogatory, and it means someone who's not that bright. But the word he used refers to a part of the female anatomy. Police officers questioned a grandfather for more than an hour after he called his neighbour, Mrs. Twit, in a row about his dog. Lawrence Mayer, 73, was visited twice by policemen at his home in Gorsley, Hertfordshire, by police who warned him not to use the term again. So he was being insulting to a neighbour and the police came round and told him not to insult her anymore. That's a total disgrace. I mean, Mr. Mayor was not being polite, but for goodness sake... The grandfather has now accused West Mercia police of wasting time on trivial nonsense. He's not only accused, he's defined them instead of tackling real crime. In January last year, Mr. Mayor's dachshund, Dixie, strayed into his neighbour's front garden, prompting the neighbour to allegedly call him a twit. Now, I don't know whether he was whether we are now talking, because this is the Telegraph, which is supposed to use good English, and they haven't made it clear whether the twit was directed at Mr. Mayor or at the Dixie the Dachshund dog. But anyway, the neighbour called either Mr. Mayor or Dixie the Dachshund dog a twit. And so Mr. Mayor then called the neighbour Mrs. Twit. And okay, he says, I admitted to the officers that I acted a bit immaturely in saying, hello, Mrs. Twit, to my neighbour, but did that really merit two of them spending more than an hour questioning me about this? And no, of course it doesn't. And hang on a minute, Sir Keir, what was that about free speech?
We've had free speech for a very, very long time in the United Kingdom, and it will last for a very, very long time.
Yeah. Right. And let's just get to Mrs. Jones, of course. You've probably heard of her. Detectives came round to question Helen Jones about her calls for the resignation of local councillors involved in a WhatsApp scandal. Apparently, some politicians in a local area around, Stockport, I think. Yeah, there it is, Stockport. They were insulting, between themselves, they were insulting to the constituents and the council residents. And when the WhatsApp conversation became public, Mrs. Jones posted on not one but maybe 2 or 3 local Facebook websites that the councillors should resign. Lo and behold, the Greater Manchester Police came round in what they termed plain clothes, although I wouldn't call this guy in any way plain clothed. Now, if he fancies coming round here and knocking on my door, I will call him a very badly dressed idiot with a big nose, right? Now, I have to say that big nose might be the result of a fisheye lens. So I'll give him the benefit of the doubt there. But honestly, a blue gingham shirt and a green jacket, for goodness sake. I mean, he's a mess, right? Do you want to come round and have a go at me? Anyway, they came round to tell this lady that they had their eye on her because she had been criticising the fitness for office of a group of Labour local politicians. So, Sir Keir, what do you have to say about that?
We've had free speech for a very, very long time in the United Kingdom, and it will last for a very, very long time. You don't agree with that?
Now listen, you semi-literate idiot, Sir Keir. We haven't had free speech for a very, very long time in the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom only started with the Act of Union in 1800. That's just over 200 years. Not that long. Not that long at all. It's not a very, very long time. You are referring to England, where there's been freedom of speech, and there was freedom of speech for a very, very long time before you lot started chipping away at it. And I'm talking in you lot, in my terminology of you lot, by all politicians, whatever the political stripe. They've been chipping away at free speech for the past 60 years or so, ever since the end of the Second World War. Well, during the Second World War, there definitely wasn't free speech, but that was another matter. OK, right, now let's go on to the next one. And while we're talking about free speech, this guy here, we're back to the famous confrontation. This is the reporter. I thought it was Vance who'd asked Zelenskyy why he wasn't wearing a suit, and I've been corrected on, well, maybe just, like several hundred comments about that. Yeah, sorry. But the fact is that question came up, and it was posed by a reporter. I don't suppose. Now, I did use the word rehearsed when I was talking about the interplay between Vance and Trump. I didn't mean that they'd done a word for word on it. I think, though, that they'd planned out, as any football team of any sort, either American or British, before the game starts, there's always some manager saying, well, that guy's weak and that guy's particularly strong, going round to the left but not to the right. So the team will take advantage of these weaknesses. And I do believe that Trump and Vance discussed between themselves, Vance was going to, because Trump kept quiet for quite a while, and Vance was the sort of attack dog, wasn't he? And I'm pretty sure that there must have been some sort of pre-talk agreement on that. It would have been silly if there hadn't been, and that's not a criticism of them. That's strategy. But I'm wondering whether this might have also been part of it, because this reporter, I don't like calling him a MAGA reporter, but he is a reporter who is married to a very faithful Trump follower called Marjorie Taylor Greene. And he said, why don't you wear a suit? That's a disgraceful thing to say, actually. I think that was thoroughly nasty. It doesn't matter what Zelenskyy was wearing, and what he was wearing appeared to be clean and neat. And if some of you might remember, Winston Churchill turned up in the White House while Britain was at war in what was called at the time a siren suit. That is something you could put on really quickly when the air raid sirens went off, and then you could, it was warm and semi-waterproof. And if you were in your pyjamas, it offered some reasonable cover when you had to run out of the house down to the Anderson shelter at the bottom of the garden or whatever. So Churchill turned up at the White House in a siren suit because he wanted to show the people of Britain, as much of the people of America, the state that his country was in. And that's exactly what Zelenskyy was doing. That's sort of his uniform. And I keep seeing posts in which they show Zelenskyy wearing a suit and saying, well, he can wear a suit for the EU president or the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Yeah, the United Kingdom. Yeah. But those photos were taken years ago, before there was a war. I don't know how people can be so... At this point, look, taking aside whether you agree with Zelenskyy turning up in a T-shirt and, chinos or whatever he's wearing or not. This is not what I'm talking about. At the moment, I'm talking about how utterly stupid people are when they show Zelenskyy wearing a suit as if he was wearing it just last week, and it doesn't occur to them that these photos were taken 3 or 4 years ago. And, even if they didn't know, you can see the difference in Zelenskyy's face. When those photos of him in the suit, he's sort of chubby-faced, politician type. And now his face has a completely different look to it. Whatever you think of him, that war has etched lines into his face that you can see. And this guy saying, "Why didn't you wear a suit?" is a disgrace and trivial almost to the point of sinfulness, really, because whether you agree with the Zelensky's politics or his ideas or his situation in America, his relationship with Trump or not, this is a man whose country is at war. And you can see that has had an effect on his face. You can see that. And you don't ask him why he's not wearing a suit. And I think if anyone had said to Winston Churchill, "Why aren't you wearing a suit?" They'd have been excluded from polite company, not like this guy who's being lauded for it. And that's a disgrace. All right, well, rant over on that. Now we come to the farm tax. The CBI is the Confederation of British Industry. And he says, the imposition of inheritance tax on farmers threatens food security and economic growth. And he's right. Well, I've done a whole video about the inheritance tax on farmers. As a matter of fact, and I made my case for this, my opinion of this perfectly clear. I think any sort of inheritance tax, whatever, is an immoral, horrible idea. When my kids were small, there were times when I was lying awake at night thinking, if my husband and I get killed in a car accident and the kids were left on their own, they would have to sell the house for the privilege of becoming orphans. I think it's beyond immoral. Anyway, it will destabilise Britain, he says, and it threatens food security, and it does, because farmers will have to sell fields, and of course the fields will be used for building projects or that sort of thing. And then, you see, this is so typically socialist. This is so typically socialist. Labour to force NHS, the National Health Service, and schools to buy homegrown food in an attempt to win over tax-hit farmers. So the government comes up with an egregious, horrible tax and then tries to balance things off by forcing people to buy British produce. That is so bloody socialist. You tell people, you have to force people to do everything. Just remove the tax and you don't have to force anyone to do anything. It's absolutely ludicrous. And as I say, such a socialist idea when you mess up in one area and instead of just saying, all right, well, that's it. No, we'll do away with that. You just take another area and try and force people. And do you think that's going to work? Of course it isn't. It's just going to put NHS and other schools and things. It's going to force them into another cycle of box ticking and administration papering. Okay. Next. Tinned fruit is healthier than you think. I do wonder if encouraging people to eat tinned fruit might have something to do with the farmers not being able to produce fruit anymore, fresh fruit anymore. Would I put that past the government? No, I wouldn't. You've heard of the nudge unit, haven't you? That's the unit that's in charge of trying to encourage people to act in certain ways. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if, anticipating the idea that fruit growers are going to be selling off orchards, they say, well, let's get people used to the idea of eating tinned fruit instead. Of course, it won't be British tinned fruit. What will the schools do then that are supposed to be forced to use British produce? However, here's a thing telling you why tinned fruit is better, and one of them is it saves you money because tinned fruit lasts a long time, whereas if you get fresh fruit, then you buy it and you leave it in a bowl in the kitchen, the side of the kitchen, and then it goes mouldy or whatever and you have to throw it out. So if you have it in a tin, you're less likely to waste it. It does remind me a bit of that joke about that person who says, I don't think fruit's healthy. Someone threw a peach at me and it damn near killed me. And the other guy says, well, how did a peach kill you? Well, it was in a tin at the time. OK, well, there you are. We are now being told we should eat more tinned fruit. I wonder why. And talking about other daft things, there's this. There's a village church in Lincolnshire had a beautifully illuminated page bearing the 10 Commandments, one of which is thou shalt not steal, and they stole it. Thieves have stolen a painting. It's not a painting, it's an illuminated manuscript anyway, of the 10 Commandments featuring the decree thou shalt not steal. Maybe they're just trying to go for maybe they regard this as a sort of list of things to do. So next thing we'll be hearing of murders and adultery going on in the area. The depiction of the religious rules was among 3 Victorian murals taken from, it's not a manuscript, it was a mural, taken from St Andrew's Church in Little Steeping, Lincolnshire, in an overnight raid last week. Basil Harwood, 80, who's been its church warden for more than 10 years, said they probably wanted to learn a bit more about the commandment, thou shalt not steal. They clearly didn't read it when they stole it, and if they did, they obviously didn't understand it. Lincolnshire Police, which is investigating, they've got time after knocking on people's doors for insulting their neighbours, have they? Anyway, they're investigating, it said the value of the stolen artworks was unknown, but they have sentimental value to the church and its members. The other paintings, also in heavy wooden frames, depict Moses delivering the commandments and the Lord's Prayer. Well, one line of the Lord's Prayer does say, forgive us our trespasses, doesn't it? As we forgive others who trespass against us. So there we are. You see, they're probably stealing and then expecting their trespassing generally to be forgiven. Right, what's next? Here we have the famous BBC documentary. So the BBC made a documentary which was entitled How to Survive a War Zone, and it was narrated by a 13-year-old boy in Gaza about how things were in Gaza. Now, what really interested me, first off, was that boy spoke very good English. He spoke lovely English. In fact, he had been educated, I believe, in Britain. Now, you wonder, Gaza is supposed to be an open-air prison. How did that kid get to be educated abroad in perfect English? Not so much an open-air prison, by the sound of things. Anyway, apart from the kid, apparently his sister, Safia Al-Yazuri, she was also featured there, and that means that you don't just pick a kid off the street and get him to say lines in a documentary, money changes hands. And it says here that how were these kids paid? They paid the boy's mother via his sister's bank account. So the kid, being 13, did not have a bank account, but the older sister did. And the BBC paid money for the boys' services and no doubt for the girls' services to the sister's bank account. And from there on, it would have gone elsewhere. I'm pretty much sure of that. And the other thing, I suppose you would know about this, that the BBC, when they showed the documentary, they mistranslated a lot of stuff. I mean, I understood the Arabic and I was I was quite surprised. Okay, so this is what the BBC translated at one point.
ولبس ملثم وكان لابس الجعب انه يعني
His face, this is the BBC translation. His face was covered and his weapon was ready.
كان جاهز للجهاد.
Prepared for battle. And then what the woman actually said,
ولبس ملثم.
his face was covered, that is, he was wearing, one of the, either a balaclava or, that scarf, the keffiyeh. And then he was wearing a vest, meaning an explosive vest.
وكان لابس الجعب انه يعني كان جاهز للجهاد.
And ready for jihad. So there's quite a difference between saying his face was covered and he was, prepared for battle. And the other thing was he was wearing an explosive vest and was prepared for jihad. There were other things. Right, this woman is shouting here, according to the BBC, the Israeli army invaded the area. Actually, that's not what the Jews invaded our area. It's always the Jews, even though, as I have to keep pointing out, Hamas killed people indiscriminately. Arabs, Christian and Muslim, and some Filipino nurses. It didn't really care who it killed. Okay, but it's always the Jews. Right, now, this one here, she's talking about Sinwar. The video, this is what the BBC says, she says.
هاي الفيديوهات انه هو ما كانش متخبي تحت الارض انه بالعكس هو بقاوم بجاهد
fighting and resisting Israeli forces.
ضد اليهود.
You can hear that Yahud right at the end, absolutely. I mean, it's so obvious. You don't even have to understand Arabic to get that. And this is what she really said. These videos confirmed
بس أكدت لنا هاي الفيديوهات إنه هو ما كانش متخبي.
He was not hiding underground.
بتحت الأرض إنه بالعكس.
On the contrary, he was engaging in resistance.
بقاوم بجاهد.
And jihad against the Jews. The BBC, I have noticed they've been doing that for a while. Anything else? No, that's it. People keep saying, this is going to be the end of the BBC in its present form. I wish it were. And some of you might not know, but I used to work for the BBC and I was so proud when I got my first job there. And even when I was working there, and that was quite a while ago, it was a very vicious, it was like a sack full of rats. I mean, it was acknowledged even then by people who worked there, and they realised it was a sack full of rats. But it was relatively honest for a while. It's been on a downhill slope for quite a while, though. And we'll end up with this. I haven't seen this play. The Last Laugh, it says, impeccable impressions make for a nostalgic evening. It's funny because when I saw this, I thought, well, that looks just like Eric Morecambe, and that's definitely Bob Monkhouse. I mean, I could see. So they've done very well with that. That's supposed to be Tommy Cooper. Well, he may have the voice. I haven't seen him. He may do it all right, but that doesn't look much like Tommy Cooper to me, which is a bit of a shame, except for the fez. This is the sort of price you have to pay for shows. Ticket prices reach faintly laughable levels. £97. That's, I don't know what seat that is, but that's a lot of money. And the writer-director Paul Hendy's homage to three British comedy greats, Tommy Cooper, Eric Morecambe and Bob Monkhouse, as seen in Edinburgh last year. The show is only 80 minutes and they say, yeah, it's only 80 minutes and it's obviously not a high scenery type of show, so it looks like they're being a little bit greedy there. But I remember I did take the family once to see this play, Cleo, Camping, Emmanuel and Dick, and it was about the Carry On team. And they were the actors were all really good, and it was mostly, as far as I remember, it was entirely taking place inside a caravan on the set of Carry On Cleo. But it was about the love affair between Sid James and Barbara Windsor. Barbara Windsor, by the way, wasn't in Carry On Cleo. No, she wasn't, was she? So it was a little bit of a, sort of liberty taking there. Yeah, it was definitely the set, because Sid James turns up in a Roman uniform, or the guy who was playing Sid James turns up in, the skirt and the breastplate. And the guy who played Sid James did a wonderful job of it. He got the laugh. In fact, the first time he came in and he said something and then he did that Sid James laugh, everyone applauded because it was so good. Almost brought tears to my eyes. The guy who was playing Kenneth Williams did a wonderful Kenneth Williams impression. The only trouble is he was about 6 inches taller than Kenneth Williams. It didn't look right when he was standing next to the other people. But anyway, yes, they did a lovely job. And I might say a good time was had by all. And if this is anything like that one, it would be a lot of fun, except I wouldn't spend £97 for a theatre ticket. No, sorry, that's a bit too much for me. All right, well, yeah, that's the grab bag for this week. And I hope you enjoyed that. Till next time. You can help my channel by subscribing and clicking the notification bell. That's quite important. And by sharing if you're so inclined. Links to my other channels and to donation methods are in the description. But the best way you can help is simply by clicking like and notify. Thank you.